So as we broke that guide apart, you'll see later we'll talk about forming work groups and then how we're going to take all of those layers of plan areas and give those to different groups and get the task done so that we can have a comprehensive plan moving forward. So step 5, and that's where we are, analyzing the staff survey. So here's some things that we wanted to spotlight from the survey. And at this point that the analysis occurred, we had 865 surveys completed. Some people reached out and said, hey, I didn't have a chance. Can you open the window? And we opened the window. So that's how we reached, I think it was 888. But as you can see, all parts of our organization were a part of the staff survey, from Airmark to building administrators to transportation, teachers, and we disaggregated and saw, what were the percentages. So just to give you a snapshot, when we say we asked everyone to complete the survey, we asked everybody to complete the survey.
And I think it's important to share also that what we're seeing here is not participation rates by cluster group, so not by staffing group, but they did an analysis and they discovered that it's statistically accurate for the percentages of the staff members that we have. So if we have, say, 56% of our staff members who are teachers, that's the percentage who took the survey. So really nice representation so far.
So one of the first questions that we posed in the survey were, do you or anyone that you're living with or caring for meet the CDC criteria as being at increased risk for severe illness due to the effects of COVID-19? I'm just going to let
It's a
that
very
sit.
sobering number.
Yeah.
Again, these are our staff members who believe that either they themselves or someone for whom they are a caregiver meet the criteria that CDC has set out as being high risk. It's half our staff.
There's a lot of implications when we start talking about that. One of the things that we were talking about in preparation today, and Carol Gosling, our HR director, is working on getting us some trend data around substitute fill rate for various positions, knowing that those are things that we need to plan for. We also discovered that although we outsource our sub services through WICSI, I believe is the name, that we still should survey or encourage WICSI to complete a survey to know how many subs are actually going to be engaging in substitute work moving forward. These are all elements that we need to take in consideration when we're deciding what is the best way to restart for the school year.
And to interject, so for our folks who are watching remotely right now, this presentation will be shared on the website so that you'll be able to very clearly see all of these numbers and access later. But if it's not, and Joe, I know you do a great job of making sure that it's visible, but this says that 50.8% are in that category.
Thank you. And then our next slide, we asked about concerns about a possible return to school. And the categories were maintaining 6 feet of physical distance, sharing classroom supplies, sanitizing frequently, wearing a mask myself, supporting students to wear a mask, and no concerns at this time. As you can see, there are concerns. But the concerns that stand out are maintaining 6 feet of physical distance and supporting students to wear a mask. 6 feet of physical distance, 85% of our staff had a concern about that, and wearing a mask, or supporting students to wear a mask, 78% of our staff had concerns about that. And board members and anyone, if you have any questions along the way or want to engage in dialogue, feel free to jump in.
I'll let you that, Mike.
Okay, that's cool. I can ramble, so jump in.
Well, so one of the things that I guess I had a concern is how we know the people that are taking the survey really understand what the CDC guidelines are.
So in our survey, we outlined some
okay.
points of that. So
Very good, thank you.
And in terms of how do we know, there's a policy that's been in place for a while for any time a staff member has a situation in which they need certain accommodations. So they have to provide certain documentation. So there's a process we'll follow to make sure that the people who are high at risk or serve or caregivers for people at high risk, we'll make sure that that's all documented and they're not coming back into buildings and they'll be safe.
That's the question I have. So of that 50-some% that land there, what are the options? What is, can they determine they don't want to come into work? Are they remote teachers? What?
The question is, I think if I understood it, a little muffled there.
Oh, sorry.
What do we do with the staff members who are not allowed to come in? And the goal is to engage them remotely. Because our goal is to have a traditional approach to school where kids come to school every day. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But we can't serve the appropriate social distance model and have all of our students back in school. So you have to figure out a way to accomplish that. And even if we could, we do know that there are a whole lot of parents, based on some of the data we saw, aren't going to send their kids anyway. So we know that if we can keep people safe, and again, we can't keep anyone safe during these times, but we can take steps to make sure people are safer. So as long as we can do our best to keep people as safe as possible, have them back in school, we'll also have a certain population of our students who will be learning remotely from home. And we know, and I think it came up earlier, we know every student needs a device. We know that every home needs internet access, and we can do that. But the question is who and how. So those are the pieces we still have to put together.
And then as a follow-up, so let's say the teachers who fit those categories, they have those characteristics, do they have the option, or is it if you fit in this category, you cannot come back?
It's a good question. If I am high at risk, can I still choose to come back? I'm not sure.
Because that creates...
Yeah, because they would, again, in order for us to provide the accommodation, they'd have to let us know.
Right.
And if they didn't tell us, then we wouldn't know.
And the toughest part of this whole conversation is that there's such a moving target. I mean,
Yes.
2 weeks from now, everything that we say could change based on what the governor demands. So I was trying to let you, because I'm sure some of my questions you're going to get to in your presentation, so I don't want to get ahead of us.
But I'm sure not all of them. And again, not only will the responses change for political reasons because the governor said so, but also as we learn more and the science becomes more obvious to us, then obviously our paths change as a result to having more information. So
Correct.
I appreciate the acceptance of the fact we're sharing information based on what we know today that could all change tomorrow.
Absolutely. And we have to have that kind of an open mind so we
Yes.
don't get ourselves boxed in.
Thank you.
So just to kind of highlight what this exercise just was, this is what it's been like for the last few weeks. You know, we start with a topic and we go down different, it's like choosing your own adventure, but then you get to a roadblock. You say, well, now what? Well, we need to gather more information. How do we gather that information? And then we seek and we network with other districts, and everyone has the people that they're reaching out to, and we're listening. So listening, learning, and then leading is kind of our approach. But we have to have these type of conversations in order to do that efficiently and appropriately.
This is also why we have placed such an emphasis on and have been urging families and staff members to keep their contact information updated with us, because, okay, so we're educating now on where things are. We might be re-educating on the new plan, in a couple weeks. So we really appreciate everybody who has taken the time to give us their updated phone number, cell phone number, text number, email. It's really been a big help. It'll be critical in the weeks to come.
And while we are collecting information and learning, there's a lot of things that are going on right now from an operational standpoint in regards to preparing for sanitation, increasing some of those shields and safety pieces. And we'll be able to talk about that a lot more. There's a long list of things that are being done to prepare our buildings right now. And that will be communicated as we develop the plan further and further. And this just in via text, that understanding specific safeguards hopefully will, put as much ease as you can in this type of situation, right? Just to let people know, like, these are the things that we are doing in order to try to create the most safe environment that we can, knowing that there's still risk. So let me share where we are. All right.
Is this the right slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
The next series of questions: what might prevent you from coming to school in the fall? And this, once again, this is from a staff perspective, but we also ask this, there's a question very similar in the family side. So if you look here, all of the numbers are concerning. to be honest. When we look at and we see 23%, well, I mean, it's almost 25%, it's 1 in 4. People say from a student in the district test positive, a staff member in the district test positive, I'm concerned, and 1 in 4 are concerned, but then the closer it gets to where I work on a daily, the more my concerns are, which is logical, but we needed to make sure that we understood that we asked those questions. So as you can see, a student in the building test positive, increase goes up. Another staff member in the building test, it increases. A student in your particular class, it definitely gets higher. And then a staff member that I team work with very closely, then it's really high. Our next series of questions were about online meeting tool preferences, some instructional technology pieces. And before going into the details here, I think it's important that we also take time to reflect on how we went into remote learning last year. It came very quickly. We are where we are. We were where we were, I should say. And we put together a plan to get learning into the hands of students with the time frame that we had. And different parts of our learning community were at different stages in regards to what that would look like. Pre-K through 8, believe were primarily packets. And then there were hybrids of things going on at the high school. So when we look at these responses, keep that in mind too. And one of the things that we've been talking about is that we can put a magnifying glass on a lot of practices and be better coming forward. So even the questions that we're asking now, there is no shame or blame in looking at this data. It's about how do we get ourselves better? How do we put in processes so we can get to some decision making on how we communicate if we are in a remote, or even moving forward. Blended learning is an approach that we may want to consider outside of COVID, outside of pandemic, but what tools do we need? What learning do we have to provide for our staff, by our staff, to be as efficient as possible? So I wanted to preface that before we look at the data as well, that we collect data not to shame or blame, but to paint a reality of where we are, and then establish mechanisms so that we can address what the data says. So we asked teachers, and we have primarily, and all staff, this is all staff responding to the survey as well, so keep that lens in mind as well. We asked, about Zoom and about Google Meet, and preferences, and the categories were not at all, I have not experienced it at all, I've only heard of it, I've used it but had some problems, I'm proficient with it, I can teach others how to use it. So we looked at that, and the data is pretty self-explanatory there. People have used, are more proficient with Zoom. Well, we've used Zoom more as a district, so that's not surprising at all. But as we look at Google Classroom as a platform to build lessons on, we asked about Google Meet because that's already embedded in what we do, and there's no additional costs there. So we asked, we'll continue to learn more. That's where focus group conversations will come in play. But what I want to highlight here, additionally, is I can teach others how to use it. When we talk about professional learning moving forward, we really need to capture and capitalize on the experts that we have in our district, and we have experts. So if we can learn from each other, there's more, we build a greater sense of efficacy. If we can build a greater sense of efficacy, we build a better environment around trust. If we build a better environment of trust, people do more, and there we have it, right? So we're looking at those, and we'll be reaching out and saying, hey, if you indicated that you can teach this to others, let's talk about what that looks like. So the next area, we wanted to know how people were communicating with families and their preferences. So Remind is a two-way communication, and Class Dojo is a two-way communication tool. And we wanted, and Class Dojo, I think, is more elementary focused, and Remind is more secondary focused. So we asked, what are people, we want to know, who can teach others how to use it? Same thing. Are you proficient? Have you had troubles? Have you only heard of it? Or not at all? And we asked our entire staff this question because we all should be communicating. Or if I'm at the grocery store and someone asks, well, how's the district communicating? If we can all respond to that collectively, we're better off as an organization. So that's why we did pose these questions to everyone and didn't differentiate between, okay, here's some questions for you teachers, here's some questions for, we're going to ask everyone all the questions.
I just want to echo that, and I think that it's important that we acknowledge that all staff should be communicating with families, but traditionally and typically and historically, for example, our food service people don't reach out to our children at home. They don't do Google Classroom necessarily. Our bus drivers are. So because our numbers are what they are, that's not a testimony of the fact that we're not doing our jobs. It just kind of highlights the fact that we need to be more inclusive with our staff in terms of engaging with students. But when you look at the numbers that we're sharing, a vast majority of our teaching and support staff are engaging, and administrative staff.
This question also had an open-ended component so that staff members could share alternate ways that they communicate with, which was really helpful because we were able to see how many are communicating by phone calls, text, email outside of these two apps.
And that's going to be huge, especially when we start looking at the next slide, and learning what our teachers did use. Because some did make Zoom outreaches, and some were using various instructional tools that we didn't mention here, but we're going to gather all that information and then talk about what that looks like from a curriculum and instructional standpoint. But we did ask, we want to know, Google Classroom seems to be a safe place where we can begin to build our classroom instruction. There's also, at the high school level, I know the CCP uses Canvas. So we have some options there, but we have to be able to, for this sake, we looked at where most people could land, and that was on the Google Classroom. So we wanted to know, how familiar, how proficient, who can teach others how to use it, what percentage of our staff. And to say that we have roughly 10% of our staff that feel as though they have the ability to teach how to use Google Classroom, I feel really good about that. That is a great place to start. And when we were having these conversations, we had a teacher union representation at the table, and there were concerns that we were on a continuum of abilities, but now we can support each other, and we know that we can do that now based upon the data. And then the other three pieces are further instructional tools that when you talk about blended learning that are popular. So we wanted to see our staff's familiarity with this. And once again, going back to how we started, no shame, no blame, there are a lot of tools that people can use. We were looking at some free tools, to be honest, and what that looks like, but also quality, and seeing what our familiarity are with those. Just to kind of, and the nature of being researchers, which as educators we are, if I didn't know about these, guess what I'm doing right now? I'm getting myself prepared, and I'm looking. But then we're going to land on some areas, a few areas that we can train our staff on universally and get really good at a few good things.
And a lot of people, originally, people were looking at that data, and they were disappointed because of the high numbers of people who never heard of these. And I got to be honest, I look at it just the opposite. We have experts in every one of those. We have people who can teach others how to use it. What we have to do is just create a forum where that can happen. So these things aren't difficult to learn, but when you have your peers who are willing to teach you, life gets a whole lot easier. And again, they'll be learning online. So it's one of those things where you have no idea how to do it, and then after playing with it a couple times, you're pretty good at it, because most of these things aren't that complicated. But for a lot of our staff, regardless of what your responsibility is, you just didn't have the need for it. I don't know what a couple of those are because I wasn't expected to use them. And even though I pride myself on all those things, it was just not what I do.
And that conversation happened a lot with the leadership team. They were very interested to see what the trend data would be for these tools and adding on additional tools, because in education, we all know, it's not just about teaching children, it's us as adults also learning and being vulnerable and sharing with one another and building that environment of safety where we can practice some new things and figure it out.
So in building an online or blended approach, we're talking about asynchronous learning and synchronous learning. Screencastify, can I capture my screen? Can I do video? Flipgrid, can students demonstrate their learning in different ways? Nearpod, can I assess students along the way? All practices that we know are important, but how does that translate to a online learning platform? We need to start thinking in that perspective, and that's what this question was to generate information on. And this just in, from Bill Oley, the slide also helps us determine our PD needs. And we've kind of talked about that a little bit, but he wanted us to emphasize the fact that our staff said that there was a large number that said, yeah, I'm willing to learn instructional technology approaches at a high clip. So we are gearing up. There are some curricular decisions that we need to make, and we're going to do that together to find out what the best method is. So the next series of questions were around collaboration during the remote learning experience. We wanted to know, how did that work? How often, and what was the quality of that? Because do we need to adjust? So here, collaboration frequency, and once again, this is throughout the entire organization. You can see 33.6% of our staff said they collaborated multiple times a week, 32% weekly, 15% monthly, and there was 19%, so they did not collaborate at all during this time away. And we have to figure out why and how we can do that better. And then the collaboration quality, very similar. 22% said there was no collaboration. 10% said there was collaboration, but it was not helpful. 37.8% said it was a little helpful, and roughly 30% said it was very helpful. So when we start thinking about the practices that we're doing right now, and we're talking about today, these are not just COVID or remote learning practices that we need to put into place, but when we do, and remember, we have a responsibility of building a strategic plan for 3 to 5 years down the road as well. This information will help feed that as we build those plans as well. So Erin,
Yeah,
this
do you
is
want
your
a
slide.
break?
You want to speak to this one?
Need a sip of water? So again, the input was being taken in not only through, check a box, but also by asking for qualitative information, open-ended questions. And some of the themes that really resonated and kept coming to the top included, teachers want to be back in school if we can do it correctly, if we can ensure that there are masks and social distancing and assurances regarding sanitization, that there need to be clear protocols and PD to ease concerns for everyone and prior to the start of school. There was a lot of concern about our littles. A lot of concern for our preschoolers, our kindergartners, not only for their fragility, but how can they keep a mask on? How can we ensure social distancing? And there's this tension. I mean, it just breaks your heart when you read a lot of these open-ended responses where, everybody wants to be there. They want to be the best, educator and support staff that they can possibly be. But, oh my gosh, my family. And oh my goodness, my own safety. There were questions about the best ways to address, okay, so what if kids don't follow the rules? Are we gonna, kick them out of school? What if it's the adults? How do we build supportive practices around that? How do I choose, this one also will break your heart, how do I choose between being a parent and being an employee? If my child's schedule is different from the schedule of the school that I'm working at, how do I choose where to put my body at that time? How do you possibly make that prioritization, other than your family comes first, right? Concerns about sanitizing and distancing. Those concerns increased with the level of exposure to a staff grouping and how often they're with children. There were many staff members willing and able to teach the instructional technology, as Michael went over already. And then we kept asking ourselves, did staff answer these questions based upon the current lack of a plan, the fact that we haven't been able to share, okay, here's exactly what we're going to do, or was it because they just honestly have these concerns and haven't been able to work them through their minds yet? So we want to know what this data will look like if we resurvey after sharing what the plan is. How will people's realities and feelings change about coming back to school in the fall?
And we're going to have an opportunity, so when we go through the next couple of slides, there will be opportunity to re-engage staff with knowing that in the next 2 weeks, a lot can change
And families.
from a health standpoint, and we'll be further along in communicating more information. So what does that actually look like? What do our next steps look like? So if we can move forward.